Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to my overview of ZEPHON. So for those not across it, I do overviews on this channel. It's where I have a look at the first 2 hours of a game. That's the Steam refund window. Steam reckons you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not in that time. And broadly speaking, I would agree as a rule and say that 20 hours in, you're probably not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short, punchy video. Keep it around 10 minutes, and then you can make up your mind on your own. So this snuck right up on me, and it is now one of my sort of top games as far, well, not on my radar. I'm playing it, yes, in pre-release for this overview, but there's a very good chance that I will put more time into it and review it as well. So suffice to say, I really, really like this. The groundwork is, this is developed and published by Proxy Studios, who previously did the Warhammer Gladius games under Slytherin. And you can see it looking at the footage, and will lead pretty early. It is effectively Gladius 2, functionally, mechanically. This is great news, by the way, because I think Gladius is one of the coolest sleeper little hits from the past, years. Sort of 4X-y Civ, a bit lighter and a bit more about like war economy, which is fascinating. Like the elevator pitch I've done before is, imagine if we made a Civ game, but we just focused entirely on the combat, to which most people would respond, that is the worst pitch ever. That's a terrible idea, because the combat, most would agree, is probably the weakest part of most Civ games, most 4X games. However, Gladius nails it, and it's probably because it is much more war economy focused. And what is there to back it up on the economic research back end, though it's lighter by comparison to, say, other contemporary 4Xs, it works really well. It's very functional. Anyway, so there's a takeaway. If you don't know what Gladius is and you find this interesting, maybe you can pick that up on special or whatever. They've done 1 billion DLCs for all the different factions, and it's just a really wonderful package. So what's happened here is basically Proxy has now flown the nest. This is self-published, so they're not with Slytherin anymore. They're also not tied to the 40k IP, and this ZEPHON IP is totally new. And it is one of the coolest world-building settings I have seen this year. Big call, I'll set it up just briefly, because here's the thing, the way that they tell the story, to use the tired touchstone, it's very Dark Souls-like, in that it's limited snippets of lore entries, and it's sort of, I don't want to get into it too much, you could do a whole video essay on it, but it taps that sort of magic that is kind of lost compared to, say, reading a book, where your mind fills in the gaps. And there's something to be said about being drip-fed world lore and giving you little snippets and bits and pieces, and then you continuously tie it together in the back of your mind and fill in the gaps. And I think that's why Dark Souls and that works so well and is kind of rich in its lore building, because of the unknown gaps in between and your mind speculating on what they are. But anyway, I digress. This is doing the same sort of thing, albeit through a 4X. So it's difficult for me to really tell you what's going on other than the snippets I've picked up. You get little bits and pieces, but mostly from things like when you research, they'll give you text. And again, I think mission and narrative delivery through research text screens might be one of my favorites. And great examples are things like XCOM, and in recent times, Xenonauts, we did playthroughs of them, even Terra Invicta. I just love when you learn more about the world through the research end. So here's the bits and pieces. The idea is that some sort of extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, but Cthulhu body horror, Cronenbergian adjacent kind of force. We're talking tentacles and gore and all sorts of weird, crazy monstrosities has invaded our planet. The intro would have us believe that in an instant billions were killed. Pretty much our entire fighting force were just eradicated at once. But on the back of this, ZEPHON, I believe it's ZEPHON, is essentially a Skynet surrogate that, in humanity's kind of darkest hour, or arguably Earth's darkest hour, has just taken control of, all our war machines and all that, and fought this war. And so you have this really unusual setting, where you have Cthulhu horror monsters fighting Terminator Skynet AI creatures almost forever winter because you play humanity, or what's left of it, more on the outs and trying to scrap away and survive. And the way that this is all manifest in gameplay is like 75% Gladius. So if you played Gladius and you hated it, I don't know if you're going to like this game no matter how cool the world building is. But if you're like me and you love Gladius, I think it's fantastic, then I would argue, big hot take, so far, I'm way more into this than Gladius. And I already love that, and I love 40k. But this world building is so unusual and really cool. So the way that it plays out is you pick essentially a faction, and instead of orcs and space marines, etc., it's more like a human centerpiece of a human faction. And there will be enemy AI, much like most 4Xs, spattered around the map, versing you. But what you're going to do, much like Gladius, again, I'm going to have to keep comparing it because it's the touchstone that's required. The idea of Gladius is that that's the name of the planet that all these 40k factions are fighting on, and a lot of the neutral mobs in the environment that give you a hard time, like, civilization's barbarians, if you will, but on crack, basically. Much more antagonistic than the barbarian phase of that game. Were giant, like, centipedes and aliens. It was really cool. It wasn't very 40k, actually, but I liked it. The kind of native wildlife, if you will. So in this case, a lot of what you're coming up against as those swapped in neutral mobs are sort of Cthulhu-type monsters. You've got these like flesh dinosaur things. I fought really big ones, and then they'll have a nest that they just keep respawning from. Little smaller, like raptors. So like Cthulhu raptors. I mean, that's enough for me to buy it. But then you're also coming across, laser shooting, essentially like hunter-killer gunships out of Terminator 2 Future Sequence. So all this crap's flying around causing trouble for you while you're just trying to eke out your little human corner. On top of that, there are full actual enemy factions by the seams of it, represented by ZEPHON, for example, who you can get into like 4x trade windows, which I don't think you really had in Gladius. So there's trade and diplomacy in this, like most 4x's. So you can actually come up against major, let's say, narrative non-human factions beyond the unaligned mobs, I suppose. But yeah, so you will play as a sort of named hero. The default introduction one is the Fallen Soldier. So on the back of all this weird mysticism, future AI tech meets Cthulhu nightmares, it's just such a great play space for an imaginative mind, and there's so many of these little sub-stories personified in all the like human faction leaders. So the Fallen Soldier is immortal, and he has a blurb when you're picking him out about how he was killed by a firing squad. It's very poetic, making an example of his desertion while the skies burned around them, all this sort of, and it's absolute delight to read. But like, he has faction-specific bonuses, an example being Undying, I think it is, something like that. He's cut off a bit of his own flesh and put it in a jar and given it to all the units that go out there. The squads will have this sort of little item. And the way that manifests in gameplay is that faction has a better regen for units. And also, he's very centric about no one gets left behind, bring home the soldiers. Just because I'm immortal doesn't mean I don't feel for my men. There's actually for a 4X, there's some really cool backstory built in. And through that, the tax and upkeep on your soldiers is more expensive. So he's just one example of a faction that I played a bit more with. But you've also got other ones. There's probably about 8, 10, something like that. And there's kind of 3 human spheres that they herald from. And I can't remember the particular names, but let's call him just normal human, right? Mercenaries, whatever. And there's a few other dudes like that. But you have 2 other things. You have one which is more AI, like hackers. That's sort of more leaning into the Terminator side of it. I played briefly as them, and the hero unit that they had is a straight out of a Ghost in the Shell major version with like sword arms. So they've got all the cool stuff in this game. And then the third faction taps into a thing called the Voice, which from what I understand is some sort of magic ether, which has something to do with the Cthulhu creature monsters. So the humans are kind of trying to tap whatever this mysticism is. And, one of the faction leaders are 3 blind ladies that came out of a bunker and just started talking in prophecies, and people followed them. And, and I think they have like a research penalty because they're more mystical. And anyway, so they all have their own flavors. The way that plays out with your actual units though, which is kind of the more unique part compared to Gladius, is that all factions have access to all unit, all research. So the research tree is the same sort of party trick that it was in Gladius, as in research 2 things from tier 1, you'll go to tier 2. This time around, I think you have to research 3 because there's so much more research. It's not really factional research primarily. It's more that there are researchers associated with factions. So for example, if I pick the Undying Soldier, he will start with the technology already unlocked to buy the starting infantry building to make mercenaries. However, if I want, I can just pivot and I can research the voice starting infantry thing, which is great because instead of human mercenaries with machine guns that look like little UN troopers, you get these dragoons that have tamed the, Cthulhu bloody penis raptors, and they ride them around, and they have the ability to tame them in the wild, so you can sort of recruit your own little dudes. So the technology is a little bit more free for all. You can find your own way through, and I suppose, pivot from which faction to what faction. It's kind of cool. It's a lot more open-ended than what you'd be used to. However, no denying that for the most part, it is still just Gladius. Same research, same hex-based thing, build out your faction, have your city fill out the tiles and expand the tiles as you go. One of the AI-centric human factions is sort of like a junior female AI that ZEPHON accidentally created based off some poor dying cancer patient who got her consciousness uploaded. But she's got the classic, because her consciousness exists in like a supercomputer citadel, it's more powerful, but you can only really build tall. You're not allowed to make more bases. You can build roads between things, which I don't believe that sort of infrastructure was in Gladius. So it's taken Gladius, it's kept like 75% of what was good about it. They've built their own world, which I think is phenomenal on top of it. And they've also added in some other 4X sensibilities that were missing in Gladius. Anyway, look, I don't want to waffle. You can tell I'm very energetic and very excited about this game, and it's going on the list of things to go a bit deeper on and review. So yeah, absolutely check it out if you're an enthusiast for the genre, or if you have any sort of ties to Gladius. I think it's an absolute no-brainer must buy. Anyway, team, much just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.